Hey guys, tonight we begin with a truth that might shatter every samurai movie you've ever loved. Those noble warriors with their gleaming katanas and codes of honor. The reality was far grimmer than Hollywood ever dared to show. Being a samurai in feudal Japan wasn't about honor duels at sunset or philosophical conversations under cherry blossoms. It was about poverty, political manipulation, and a social system designed to crush your spirit one rice grain at a time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You're born into a samurai family in 16th century Japan. Congratulations, you think. You're part of the warrior elite, destined for glory and respect. But here's what nobody tells you about that destiny. You're actually entering a life of servitude so complete that medieval European serfs would look at you with pity. Your entire existence revolves around one person, your daimyo, your feudal lord. And that person owns you more thoroughly than any slave owner ever owned property. Let's start with your childhood, because that's where the conditioning begins. From the moment you can walk, you're taught that your life has no value except in service to your lord. Not your family, not your community, not even your own children. Your master. You don't learn to read poetry or study philosophy for enlightenment. You memorize endless lists of proper bowing techniques, the correct way to address 17 different ranks of nobility, and how to commit ritual suicide with style. By age 7, you're practicing with wooden swords until your hands bleed. Not because you're training to be a hero, but because you're learning to be a very expensive, very disposable tool. Your father doesn't teach you swordsmanship with pride in his eyes. He teaches it with resignation, knowing that every technique he shows you is another way you might die for someone else's ambition. And the poverty. Oh, the crushing, relentless poverty. See, here's the thing about being a samurai that movies never mention. You're broke. Spectacularly, hopelessly broke. Your social status prevents you from engaging in trade or commerce because that would be beneath your warrior dignity. But your stipend from your lord? It's barely enough to keep you fed, let alone maintain the appearance of nobility that society demands. You're expected to own multiple sets of armour, each costing more than a peasant family earns in 5 years. Your swords aren't just weapons, they're status symbols that need to be perfectly maintained, polished and replaced when damaged. Your clothing must reflect your rank, your horse must be worthy of a warrior, and your home must be suitable for entertaining other samurai, all on a salary that wouldn't keep a merchant's dog comfortable. So what do? You go into debt, crushing generational debt to merchants who despise you but need your social connections. You mortgage your children's future to maintain the fiction of your dignity today. You sell family heirlooms, borrow against next year's stipend, and slowly watch your ancestral home crumble around you while you pretend everything is fine. Meanwhile, those merchants you're borrowing from, they're getting rich. The very people your social system says are beneath you are living in luxury while you count rice grains to make them last the week. But you can't acknowledge this reality because admitting that a merchant has more wealth than a samurai would shatter the entire social order. So you smile, bow appropriately, and quietly hate yourself for needing their money. Your daily life is a performance of dignity you can't afford. You wake up in a house with holes in the roof that you can't repair because hiring workmen costs money you don't have. You put on armour that's been patched so many times it's more thread than metal. You carry swords that haven't been properly sharpened in months because you can't afford the craftsman's fee. But you stand straight, you bow correctly, and you pretend that your empty stomach isn't cramping with hunger as you report for duty. Because showing weakness, admitting need, or asking for help would bring shame not just on you, but on your entire family line. Better to starve with dignity than eat with dishonour. And then there's the violence. Not the clean, noble violence of movies, but the brutal, senseless reality of medieval warfare. When your lord decides he wants his neighbour's rice fields, you don't get to debate the ethics of the conflict. You don't get to question whether the cause is just. You pick up your weapons and you kill farmers. That's right. Most of your military service isn't fighting other samurai in honourable combat. It's slaughtering peasants who can't fight back, burning villages full of families, cutting down unarmed men trying to protect their children. The katana you've been taught to revere as a sacred object, it's mostly used to kill people who never had a chance to defend themselves. Your lords don't send you to fight other samurai unless absolutely necessary, because samurai are expensive to replace. Peasants are free. So your job becomes terrorizing the population into submission, making sure the rice flows upward to your master while the people who grow it go hungry. You're not a noble warrior. You're an armed tax collector with a fancy sword. But here's where it gets truly twisted. The same social system that keeps you poor and forces you to commit atrocities also demands that you feel honoured by the privilege. You're supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to die for your lord's ambition. The worse your life becomes, the more noble your suffering is supposed to be. Can't afford food? That's training in endurance. Watching your children go hungry? That's teaching them the value of sacrifice. Being ordered to burn down a village of innocents? That's demonstrating your loyalty and discipline. The system has convinced you that misery is virtue, and questioning that misery is the real sin. Your education reinforces this at every turn. You study texts that tell you how fortunate you are to serve, how meaningless your individual desires are compared to your duty, how the highest achievement in life is to die beautifully for your master. You memorize poems about cherry blossoms falling gracefully, because that's how you're supposed to think about your own death. Brief, beautiful, and utterly expendable. And if you start to question any of this, if you begin to wonder why you're living in poverty while merchants grow rich, why you're killing innocents for someone else's greed, why your children are inheriting debt and misery instead of honour, there's always seppuku. Ritual suicide, presented as the ultimate expression of honour, but really just a convenient way to eliminate troublesome thoughts. The blade isn't just a weapon for external enemies. It's a constant reminder that thinking too hard about your situation might require you to open your own belly and die in agony. The system has weaponized shame so effectively that you'll kill yourself rather than admit the whole thing is insane. Your relationships suffer under this pressure. You can't be honest with your wife about your fears because that would be unmanly. You can't show affection to your children because that might make them soft. You can't form genuine friendships with other samurai because you're all competing for the scraps of favour your lord throws out. Everyone around you is either above you in rank, meaning you must defer to them, or below you, meaning you must maintain distance and authority. You live in a world of constant performance where showing your true self to anyone could destroy your family's reputation for generations. So you become a master of masks, wearing a different face for every social situation, until you're not sure which one is really you anymore. The honour you're supposed to embody becomes a prison that keeps you from ever being human. And the women in your life, they have it even worse. Your wife exists to produce male heirs and maintain your household's reputation. If she fails at either task, it's her fault, never yours. She's expected to manage the impossible finances you bring home, somehow stretching nothing into something while never complaining about the impossibility of the task. If you die in service to your lord, which is statistically likely, she's expected to mourn appropriately for exactly the right amount of time, then either remarry someone your family chooses or spend the rest of her life as a burden on relatives who can't afford to support her. Her education consists entirely of learning to suffer gracefully and raise children who will suffer gracefully in turn. Your daughters face an even bleaker future. They'll be married off to cement political alliances, traded like livestock to men they've never met, who may treat them well or terribly, depending entirely on luck. They have no legal rights, no economic independence, and no way to escape if their situations become unbearable except through death. The social mobility that Hollywood loves to show, the idea that a samurai could rise through skill and dedication, complete fantasy. Your birth determines your rank, and your rank determines everything about your life. You might be the greatest swordsman in Japan, the wisest strategist, the most loyal retainer, but if you were born to a low-ranking samurai family, you'll die in a low-ranking samurai family. Meanwhile, your lord's incompetent nephew gets promoted over you because of his bloodline. Merit has nothing to do with advancement. Politics, family connections, and pure luck determine who rises and who remains trapped in cycles of poverty and service. Your skill with a blade might keep you alive longer, but it won't make your life any better. The seasonal campaigns make everything worse. Just when you've managed to scrape together enough resources to repair your home or feed your family properly, your lord decides it's time for another war. You're marched off to fight in battles you don't understand for causes you weren't consulted about, leaving your family to manage without your already inadequate income. If you survive the campaign, you return home to find everything falling apart. If you don't survive, your family inherits your debts along with your supposedly honourable name. Either way, the cycle continues, grinding down another generation in the machinery of feudal obligation. The cherry blossoms that poets romanticize become a cruel joke when you're living this reality. Spring means campaign season, when your lord decides which neighbour's territory looks appetizing. Those delicate pink petals falling like snow, they're falling on ground that will soon be soaked with blood. Your blood, quite possibly. And the famous samurai code, bushido, that everyone talks about with such reverence? It's a leash disguised as philosophy. Every principle serves to make you a more obedient tool. Loyalty means never questioning orders, no matter how senseless. Courage means walking into certain death with a smile. Honor means accepting humiliation from your superiors while inflicting it on your inferiors. The code doesn't elevate you, it programs you. Consider what happens when you're ordered to commit an atrocity that sickens your soul. Let's say your lord wants to make an example of a village that was late with their rice tribute. You're commanded to execute every man, woman, and child. Your human instincts scream in horror, but Bushido whispers that questioning orders shows weakness. Hesitation brings shame. Mercy is failure. So you do it. You kill children who remind you of your own. You watch mothers die trying to protect babies. You burn homes that look exactly like the one your family huddles in back home. And when it's over, when the smoke clears and the screaming stops, you're supposed to feel proud. You've demonstrated perfect loyalty. You've upheld the code. But at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, those faces haunt you. Those voices echo in your dreams. The code that demanded this horror from you offers no comfort for the guilt that follows. Bushido created the wound, but provides no healing. You're left to carry the weight of what you've done while pretending it was glorious. Your training makes this psychological torture worse. From childhood, you've been taught that a samurai's sword is his soul. Your katana isn't just a weapon, it's supposedly the physical manifestation of your spiritual essence. But what does that make you when your soul is used primarily to butcher the helpless? What does it say about your essence when it's employed in the service of greed and cruelty? The ceremonies around your swords become hollow mockeries. You perform the ritual cleaning with religious devotion, polishing away the blood of innocence while reciting prayers about honour. You maintain the blade with meticulous care, sharpening it for the next massacre. The more perfectly you maintain your soul, the more efficiently you can destroy others, and the psychological conditioning runs deeper than you realise. You've been taught that physical pain is temporary, but shame lasts forever. This creates a hierarchy of suffering where social embarrassment becomes worse than death. You'd rather die in agony than live with the knowledge that someone saw you fail to meet an impossible standard. This twisted logic permeates every aspect of your existence. You'll go hungry rather than admit you can't afford food. You'll wear threadbare clothes rather than acknowledge your poverty. You'll send your children to bed with empty stomachs rather than swallow your pride and beg for help. The system has convinced you that maintaining appearances is more important than maintaining life. Your relationships become transactions based on rank and obligation rather than genuine connection. When you speak to your superior, every word is calculated to demonstrate proper respect. When you address an inferior, every phrase reinforces the hierarchy. Authentic communication becomes impossible when every conversation is a performance of your social position. Even your marriage is a political arrangement designed to benefit your family's standings rather than create personal happiness. You might spend decades living with someone you've never had an honest conversation with, because honesty requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness. Your wife becomes a stranger you share a house with, not a partner you share a life with. The few moments of genuine human connection you experience become precious beyond measure, but they're also dangerous. Caring too deeply about anything makes you vulnerable. Love becomes a liability when your duty might require you to sacrifice what you love. So you learn to hold everything at arm's length, never fully investing in relationships that could be severed by your Lord's whims. Your children grow up seeing this emotional distance and learning to replicate it. They watch you struggle with poverty while pretending prosperity, witness you commit violence while speaking of honor, observe you sacrifice everything while claiming privilege. They absorb these contradictions as normal, preparing to pass them on to their own children in an endless cycle of dysfunction disguised as tradition. The seasonal rhythms that should bring comfort become sources of dread. Spring means campaign season and potential death. Summer means sweltering in armor while marching to conflicts you don't understand. Autumn means harvest time, when you collect taxes from people who can't afford to pay them. Winter means huddling in a cold house, counting the days until spring brings fresh horrors. You develop a relationship with death that's simultaneously intimate and terrifying. You're constantly prepared to die, trained to die beautifully, expected to die meaningfully. But this familiarity with mortality doesn't bring peace. Instead, it creates a constant low-level anxiety that colours every experience. You can't fully enjoy a meal because it might be your last. You can't relax with your family because you might be dead tomorrow. The famous samurai meditation practices aren't about finding inner peace. They're about accepting your role as a disposable tool. You sit in silence, contemplating your insignificance, training your mind to let go of personal desires and ambitions. The goal isn't enlightenment but compliance. A meditative samurai is an obedient samurai. Your artistic pursuits serve the same function. Poetry, calligraphy, tea ceremony, all of these refinements exist to reinforce the aesthetic of noble suffering. You write verses about accepting fate while secretly resenting it. You practice brushstrokes that express serenity while your heart burns with frustrated rage. You perform tea ceremonies that celebrate simplicity while drowning in the complexity of your obligations. The irony becomes inescapable. The more perfectly you embody the samurai ideal, the more miserable you become. The better you are at your job, the more atrocities you're asked to commit. The more loyal you prove yourself, the more your lord takes advantage of that loyalty. Excellence becomes a trap that ensures you'll never escape your circumstances. An escape becomes an increasingly tempting fantasy. You dream of running away, of abandoning your responsibilities and starting fresh somewhere else. But even your dreams are poisoned by conditioning. You can't imagine abandoning your duty without also imagining the shame it would bring. Your fantasies of freedom always end with visions of seppuku, because you've been taught that death is preferable to dishonor. The merchants and artisans you look down upon start to seem enviable. They may lack your social status, but they have something infinitely more valuable: choices. A blacksmith can decide what to forge. A farmer can choose what to plant. A merchant can select his trading partners. You can only wait for orders and obey them completely. Your supposed privileges become burdens in disguise. The right to wear two swords, means carrying extra weight on long marches. The honour of serving directly under your lord means being available for his whims at all hours. The distinction of your family name means living up to impossible expectations set by ancestors you've never met. Even your victories feel hollow. When you win a battle, it's your lord who gets the glory. When you demonstrate exceptional skill, it reflects well on your training, not your individual merit. When you show courage under fire, it proves the effectiveness of the system that shaped you. You're never allowed to take personal credit for your achievements, but you bear full responsibility for your failures. The cycle perpetuates itself through sheer momentum. You can't question the system because questioning it would mean admitting that your entire life has been wasted in service of a sacrifice you've already made. You can't save your lie. You can't change course because changing course would dishonour every children from this fate, because doing so would require abandoning the very identity that defines your worth. So you continue forward, one step at a time, carrying burdens that grow heavier with each passing year, serving masters who see you as expendable, maintaining honour that costs more than it's worth, and hoping that somehow, someday, the suffering will be revealed to have meaning. But deep down, in the quiet moments between campaigns, you suspect it never will. And the worst part? The system ensures you can never even voice these doubts. There's no therapy, no counselling, no safe space to process the trauma you're accumulating. Your only emotional outlet is supposed to be art, but even that's regulated. Your poetry must reflect proper sentiment. Your calligraphy must demonstrate discipline. Your musical instruments can only play approved melodies that reinforce social harmony. When you write a haiku about the beauty of cherry blossoms, you're not expressing genuine appreciation for nature. You're performing the role of a cultured warrior for an audience that's always watching. When you practice tea ceremony, you're not finding meditative peace. You're demonstrating that you can follow precise protocols even in the most mundane activities. Every creative act becomes another form of surveillance, another test of your compliance. Your education, such as it is, serves only to make you a more effective tool. You learn to read just enough to understand orders and military dispatches. You study history only to memorize examples of proper loyalty and glorious deaths. Mathematics exists solely to help you calculate supplies and troop movements. Philosophy is reduced to maxims that reinforce obedience. There's no room for curiosity, creativity, or independent thought. The famous martial arts you practice aren't about self-improvement or spiritual development. They're about becoming a more efficient killer. Every kata you perfect, every technique you master, every principle you internalize is designed to make you deadlier in service to your Lord. The meditation that accompanies your training isn't about finding inner peace. It's about suppressing your natural reluctance to take human life. Your sword work becomes a metaphor for your entire existence. You spend countless hours perfecting your technique, honing your reflexes, developing muscle memory that will serve you in combat. But all of this effort, this dedication, this mastery serves someone else's purposes. Your skill belongs to your Lord as completely as your life does. You're like a craftsman who can never own the things he creates. The seasonal festivals that punctuate the year become cruel reminders of what you're missing. While merchants and farmers celebrate the harvest with genuine joy, sharing food and laughter with their families, you're performing ceremonial duties that emphasize hierarchy and obligation. Your festivals aren't about community or thanksgiving. They're about reinforcing everyone's place in the social order. During the cherry blossom viewing, while others see beauty and renewal, you're reminded of the transience of life and the inevitability of death. The falling petals don't inspire you to appreciate the moment. They teach you to accept that all things, including your life, are temporary and expendable. Even nature becomes a classroom for lessons in mortality and meaninglessness. The religious aspects of your culture offer no real comfort either. Buddhism, as interpreted for the samurai class, focuses obsessively on the illusory nature of individual existence and the importance of detachment from worldly desires. This isn't presented as a path to enlightenment, but as justification for your suffering. Your misery is supposed to be evidence of spiritual progress. Your detachment from family and personal happiness is painted as holy wisdom. Shintoism, meanwhile, emphasizes your connection to ancestral spirits who supposedly watch and judge your every action. But these ancestors aren't benevolent guides. They're eternal critics whose honor depends on your behavior. Every choice you make is weighed against the reputation of people who died centuries before you were born. You're haunted by ghosts you've never met, who demand perfection you can never achieve. Your housing situation reflects your impossible position perfectly. You're expected to maintain a residence befitting your rank, but you can't afford the upkeep. Your home becomes a theatre set, impressive from the outside but crumbling within. You spend money you don't have on cosmetic repairs to preserve appearances while ignoring structural problems that grow worse each year. The gardens you're supposed to cultivate become exercises in futility. You plant flowers you can't afford to replace when they die. You maintain pathways you don't have time to walk. You create spaces for contemplation you can never use because you're always on duty. Your garden becomes a monument to aspirations you can never fulfill, beautiful from a distance, but hollow up close. Your clothing tells the same story. The elaborate robes and formal wear required for ceremonies cost more than your family's annual food budget, but wearing anything less would be a social disaster. So you borrow, you scrimp, you go without necessities to afford luxuries that serve no purpose except maintaining the illusion of prosperity. Your wardrobe becomes a financial weapon aimed at your own stability. The weapons you carry aren't just tools of war. They're symbols of debt and obligation that you can never set down. Your katana might be worth more than your house, but you can't sell it without destroying your identity. Your armor represents years of your family's savings, but it only protects you while you're risking your life for someone else's benefit. You're literally wearing your financial ruin as a badge of honor. Even your food becomes a performance. The elaborate meal presentations required when entertaining other samurai demand skills and ingredients you can't afford to develop or purchase. You learn to arrange 7 grains of rice, to look abundant, to present water as if it were expensive tea, to make poverty appear like aesthetic choice. Your hunger becomes art, your deprivation transformed into discipline. The few times you're invited to your lord's residence, the contrast becomes unbearable. You see rooms larger than your entire house, meals that could feed your family for months, casual displays of wealth that mock everything you've sacrificed to maintain your position. Your lord discusses your life and death over delicacies you've never tasted, making decisions about your future while you kneel in uncomfortable positions on cold floors. But you can't resent this inequality openly. Instead, you must express gratitude for being allowed to witness such magnificence. You thank your Lord for the privilege of serving someone so worthy of luxury. You praise his wisdom in managing resources you'll never have access to. Your genuine feelings of injustice must be buried beneath layers of performed appreciation. Your training in emotional control becomes a form of psychological torture. You learn to maintain perfect composure while watching your children go hungry. You practice showing no reaction when ordered to commit acts that sicken your soul. You develop the ability to smile while your heart breaks, to bow gracefully while your spirit crumbles. This isn't strength, it's systematic destruction of your humanity disguised as discipline. The concept of face of public reputation becomes a prison more confining than any physical cell. A single moment of weakness, one display of genuine emotion, a brief lapse in protocol, can destroy not just your standing, but your entire family's future. You live in constant terror of making a mistake that will echo through generations. Your great-grandchildren might suffer for a decision you make in a moment of human frailty. Your relationships with other samurai are poisoned by competition and hierarchy. The man you served alongside in battle might be promoted above you for reasons having nothing to do with merit or valor. Suddenly, someone you considered a friend becomes someone you must defer to, someone whose commands you must obey without question. Friendship becomes impossible when the social order can reshape any relationship at any moment. The women in samurai families develop their own forms of quiet desperation. Your wife learns to manage household finances that don't balance, to feed a family on resources that aren't adequate, to maintain appearances when everything is falling apart. She becomes an expert at creative poverty, finding ways to make nothing look like something. Her skills are remarkable, but they're skills no one should need to develop. Your daughters watch their mother's quiet desperation and prepare for lives of identical struggle. They learn that their value lies in their ability to suffer gracefully, to marry well for their family's benefit, to produce sons who will continue the cycle. They're educated just enough to be suitable companions for samurai husbands, but not enough to imagine alternatives to their predetermined fate. The medical care available to samurai families reflects the broader contradictions of your position. You're important enough that your lord wants you healthy for service, but not valuable enough to receive the best treatments available. You get battlefield surgery when wounded in his wars, basic remedies when sick between campaigns. Your health matters only insofar as it affects your usefulness as a tool. Injuries that would end another man's career become challenges you must overcome to remain valuable. A sword cut that leaves you with limited mobility in one arm can't be allowed to interfere with your duties. A head wound that affects your balance must be compensated for through extra training. Your body becomes a collection of accumulated damage that you're expected to ignore in service of your obligations. The aging process brings special horrors for samurai. As your physical abilities decline, your value to your lord decreases, but your obligations remain unchanged. You might spend your final years watching younger men take on the active duties you can no longer perform, relegated to advisory roles that carry responsibility without authority. You become a burden on a system that has no place for burdens. Your sons watch this decline with mixed emotions. They want to honour you, but they also see their own future written in your struggles. They're being prepared for the same life of service and sacrifice, but with each passing year, it becomes harder to pretend that this fate is desirable. The cycle continues, but the pretense becomes more difficult to maintain. The merchant class you're supposed to look down upon grows wealthier and more powerful with each passing generation. They build larger houses, wear finer clothes, eat better food, and enjoy freedoms you can't imagine. But you must continue to treat them as social inferiors, even as you depend on their loans and patronage. The fiction of samurai superiority becomes harder to believe when the evidence contradicts it daily. Your lord's decisions affect your life completely, but you have no input into those decisions. He might decide to switch allegiances in a larger conflict, instantly making yesterday's allies into today's enemies. He might choose to support a losing cause that will result in your family's destruction. He might simply grow bored with peace and decide that war sounds entertaining. Your life hangs on the whims of someone who sees you as interchangeable with any other samurai. The famous loyalty that samurai are supposed to embody becomes a trap that ensures your exploitation. The more loyal you prove yourself, the more you'll be asked to sacrifice. The better you serve, the more service will be demanded. Excellence becomes a guarantee of increased suffering, while mediocrity might actually provide some protection from the worst assignments. Your training in swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship represents years of dedicated effort that could have been directed towards skills that might improve your actual circumstances. Instead of learning trades that could provide income, you perfect arts that only have value in service to others. You become a master of techniques that benefit everyone except yourself. The code of bushido that supposedly governs your behaviour is revealed, through daily experience, to be a collection of rules designed to make you compliant rather than noble. Honour means accepting humiliation. Courage means walking into obvious traps. Loyalty means ignoring your own judgment in favour of someone else's commands. The code doesn't elevate you. It programs you to be a more efficient tool. Even your death, when it finally comes, won't belong to you. The manner of your dying will be interpreted and reinterpreted to serve political purposes you'll never understand. Your final moments will become lessons for other samurai, warnings or inspirations as needed. Your death will be more useful to the system than your life ever was. But tonight, in the quiet moments between duties, you might allow yourself to imagine what life could have been like if you'd been born into different circumstances. If you could have chosen your own path, developed your own relationships, pursued your own interests. These dreams are dangerous because they reveal the magnitude of what you've lost. But they're also the only thing that keeps your humanity alive in a system designed to destroy it. And what makes it even more crushing is that you're not allowed to grieve for this lost potential. Regret is weakness. Wondering about alternatives is disloyalty. The system has convinced you that even thinking about other possibilities is a form of betrayal against your ancestors, your lord, and your destiny. So you bury these dangerous thoughts deep inside, where they fester like infected wounds. Iso. Your daily routine becomes a ritual of self-denial disguised as discipline. You wake before dawn, not because you're eager to serve, but because sleeping in would be interpreted as laziness. You eat sparingly, not because you're practicing moderation, but because there isn't enough food. You maintain your equipment obsessively, not because you take pride in it, but because a dull blade or tarnished armor could be seen as disrespect toward your position. Every aspect of your existence is choreographed by rules you had no part in creating. The way you walk must demonstrate proper bearing. The way you speak must reflect appropriate deference or authority, depending on who you're addressing. The way you sit, stand, eat, and even breathe is governed by protocols that serve no purpose except maintaining the illusion of order in a fundamentally chaotic system. Your horse, if you're fortunate enough to have one, becomes another symbol of your impossible situation. You need the animal to maintain your status as a mounted warrior, but feeding and caring for it consumes resources your family desperately needs. The horse eats better than your children do, but you can't change this without admitting that you can't afford to be what you're supposed to be. The armor you wear tells a story of accumulated compromises. The breastplate might have belonged to your grandfather, dented from battles you'll never hear about. The helmet could be a hand-me-down from a cousin who died young. The leg guards might be borrowed from another family, with promises of return that everyone knows you can't keep. You're literally wearing other people's history while trying to write your own. Your weapon's maintenance becomes a meditation on futility. You polish your katana to mirror brightness, while knowing it will be stained with blood again soon. You sharpen your tanto until it can split hairs while understanding that its primary purpose is to open your own belly if shame demands it. You care for instruments of death with the tenderness of a parent caring for a child. The tea ceremonies you're expected to participate in mock your daily reality. You practice the precise movements of serving tea you can't afford to guests. You can't invite to a house that's falling apart. The aesthetic of simplicity celebrated in these rituals becomes a cruel joke when your simplicity is involuntary poverty rather than chosen minimalism. Your correspondence with family members becomes an exercise in creative fiction. Letters home must maintain the pretense that you're thriving in service to your lord. You describe honour received rather than humiliations endured. You mention battles won rather than innocents slaughtered. You write about the beauty of seasonal changes while omitting the horror of what you've witnessed during those same seasons. The few books you're allowed to own and read serve as propaganda for your own oppression. Stories of legendary samurai who died gloriously for their masters. Poems about the beauty of sacrifice. Philosophical treatises on the meaninglessness of individual desires. Your literature doesn't expand your mind. It contracts it, channeling your thoughts into approved patterns that reinforce your compliance. Your dreams, when exhaustion finally allows you to sleep, are invaded by the faces of people you've killed. Not enemy warriors who died fighting honourably, but farmers who couldn't defend themselves, children who ran too slowly, women who begged for mercy in languages you didn't understand. These ghosts don't care about your codes of honor or your loyalty to your lord. They just want to know why you chose to end their lives. The seasonal campaigns blend into an endless cycle of violence, punctuated by brief periods of anxious peace. Spring brings orders to march. Summer means fighting in conditions that claim as many lives through disease and exhaustion as through enemy action. Autumn requires collecting tributes from populations already devastated by war. Winter offers no rest, only time to prepare for the next cycle of destruction. Your body accumulates scars that tell the story of your service in ways your mouth never could. The mark on your shoulder from a spear thrust during a village raid. The line across your forearm from a desperate farmer's sickle. The permanent limp from a horse that fell during a charge against unarmed peasants. Each wound represents a moment when you chose duty over humanity, and your flesh bears witness to those choices. The religious festivals that mark the calendar become opportunities for enforced gratitude. You're required to express thanks for the privilege of serving, appreciation for the wisdom of your superiors, and joy at the prospect of future sacrifices. Your participation in these celebrations must appear genuine even when every fibre of your being rebels against the hypocrisy. Your children's education mirrors your own indoctrination, but watching it happen to them breaks something inside you that you didn't know could still be broken. You see your son learning the same empty phrases about honour that were beaten into you. You watch your daughter accepting limitations on her dreams that mirror the ones you accepted. You're complicit in destroying their futures, just as your parents were complicit in destroying yours. The weapons training you provide your children becomes a form of child abuse, disguised as preparation. You teach them techniques for killing because the system demands it, even though every lesson moves them further away from the innocent children they were born to be. You're training them to become the same kind of tool you've become, and you hate yourself for it, even as you continue the lessons. Your wife's quiet desperation manifests in ways that would break your heart if you allowed yourself to feel it fully. She mends clothes that should be replaced, stretches meals that should be larger, and smiles when she should be weeping. Her strength in the face of impossible circumstances makes you feel both proud and ashamed. Proud of her resilience, ashamed that your life choices have made that resilience necessary. The merchant families you interact with develop their own forms of subtle mockery. They bow appropriately and use respectful language, but their eyes hold knowledge of your desperation. They know you need their goods more than they need your patronage. They understand that your social superiority is a fiction maintained through their politeness rather than your actual position. Your debts to these merchants become chains that bind your entire family's future. The interest compounds faster than you can pay it, ensuring that your children will inherit not just your obligations, but your creditors. The money you borrow to maintain today's dignity becomes tomorrow's humiliation, but you have no choice except to keep borrowing or abandon the pretense of being what you're supposed to be. The political manoeuvring among your lord's retainers creates an atmosphere of constant suspicion and competition. The samurai who fought beside you last month might be undermining your position this month if he thinks it will advance his own standing. Loyalty flows upward to your lord, but horizontally among your peers, it's every man for himself in a zero-sum game, where someone else's advancement often means your decline. Your lord's favour becomes the most precious and unreliable currency in your world. A single word of approval can elevate your status and improve your family's circumstances. A moment of displeasure can destroy everything you've built over years of faithful service. You live in constant awareness that your entire future depends on the moods and whims of someone who sees you as interchangeable with dozens of other retainers. The intelligence you might have applied to improving your own circumstances must instead be directed towards serving your lord's interests, which often conflict with your own. You develop strategies for battles that will enrich him while impoverishing the regions you fight in. You plan campaigns that will advance his political position while ensuring that you and your fellow samurai face maximum danger for minimum reward. Your education in strategy and tactics makes you acutely aware of how thoroughly you're being exploited, but this knowledge only increases your suffering without providing any means of escape. You understand the economic and political forces that keep you trapped, but understanding doesn't change your circumstances. If anything, it makes them harder to bear because you can see exactly how the system works against you. The few moments of genuine human connection you experience become precious beyond measure, but they're also dangerous because they remind you of what you've sacrificed. A conversation with a merchant who treats you as an equal rather than a social superior. A smile from a child who doesn't know enough about rank to be afraid of you. A moment of shared laughter with another samurai who briefly drops his guard. These interactions show you glimpses of the person you might have been in different circumstances. Your artistic pursuits become outlets for emotions you can't express directly, but even these are constrained by expectations and traditions that limit their therapeutic value. Your poetry must reflect proper sentiment and approved themes. Your calligraphy must demonstrate discipline rather than creativity. Your music must follow established forms rather than expressing personal feelings. Art becomes another form of performance rather than genuine self-expression. The natural world around you offers beauty that your circumstances prevent you from fully appreciating. Cherry blossoms remind you of mortality rather than inspiring wonder at nature's renewal. Mountain vistas make you think about strategic positions rather than stirring aesthetic appreciation. Rivers suggest barriers to military movement rather than sources of life and peace. Even beauty becomes militarized in your mind. Your aging process brings special terrors because it reveals the ultimate futility of your sacrifice. The strength you preserved through discipline and training will eventually fail. The skills you developed through years of practice will be forgotten when younger men replace you. The loyalty you demonstrated through countless acts of service will be irrelevant when you're too old to be useful. Your entire identity is built on capabilities that time will inevitably erode. The prospect of death, which you've been trained to accept with equanimity, becomes more complex as you realize how little your life has mattered to anyone except yourself. Your death will be recorded as a statistic in your Lord's service, noted briefly in records that few will ever read. The years of suffering and sacrifice will be reduced to a single line describing your final moments, probably inaccurately. Your burial, when it comes, will reflect your social position rather than your human worth. The ceremony will follow prescribed forms that emphasize duty and hierarchy rather than celebrating the unique person you were beneath all the role-playing and performance. Even in death, you won't escape the system that consumed your life. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of your existence is that you've been conditioned to see all of this suffering as noble, meaningful, and worthy of gratitude. The system has convinced you that your misery is evidence of virtue, that your sacrifice serves some greater purpose, that your compliance with injustice somehow makes you honourable. You've been programmed to take pride in your own destruction. The cherry blossoms will fall again this year, as they have for centuries before, and will for centuries after. But you won't see them as symbols of natural beauty or renewal. You'll see them as reminders of your own transience, your own expendability, your own role as a brief and ultimately meaningless element in a larger pattern that continues without regard for your individual hopes, dreams, or suffering. And when the wind scatters those petals, you'll bow appropriately, compose a proper poem about the beauty of impermanence, and prepare for whatever service your Lord demands next. Because that's what samurai do. That's who you are. That's all you've ever been allowed to be. The mountain fortress where you sometimes stand guard offers a view of the world that stretches beyond the immediate concerns of service and duty. But even this perspective becomes another source of melancholy. You can see villages in the distance where people live simpler lives, pursuing their own interests, making their own choices, raising their families without the constant threat of being called away to die for someone else's ambitions. Those distant homes represent possibilities that were never available to you, paths not taken because your birth predetermined your destination. The smoke rising from their hearth speaks of domestic peace you'll never know. The fields surrounding them represent work that benefits the worker rather than some distant master. The children playing in their yards will grow up to choose their own futures rather than inheriting predetermined roles. But you can't allow yourself to dwell on these observations for long, because doing so leads to questions about justice, fairness, and the nature of the social order you serve. These are dangerous thoughts that could undermine your ability to function within the system. So you turn your attention back to scanning for threats, checking your equipment, and maintaining the vigilant alertness that your position demands. The irony that your vigilance protects a system that destroys you is not lost on you, but acknowledging it openly would be tantamount to treason. You guard the gates that keep you imprisoned, patrol the walls that confine your spirit, and defend the order that denies your humanity. Your duty requires you to be complicit in your own oppression, and your honour demands that you take pride in that complicity. The letters you receive from home become exercises in reading between the lines, deciphering the coded language of polite desperation that your family has learned to speak. When your wife writes that the children are learning patience, you understand that they're going hungry. When she mentions that the house requires only minor repairs, you know that major structural problems are being ignored because there's no money to address them. Your responses must be equally coded, maintaining the fiction that your service brings honour and prosperity to your household. You write about the beauty of your lord's castle while omitting that you sleep in the servants' quarters. You describe the magnificence of ceremonial occasions while neglecting to mention that you borrowed your formal clothing and will spend months paying for the privilege of looking respectable for a single evening. The seasonal rotation of duties ensures that you never have enough time in one place to form meaningful relationships or develop any sense of home. Just as you begin to understand the rhythms of a particular posting, you're moved to another location where you must start over, learning new hierarchies, new expectations, new ways to fail at meeting impossible standards. Your knowledge of multiple castles and territories gives you a broader perspective on the political manoeuvring that shapes your world. But this understanding only makes your powerlessness more apparent. You can see the larger patterns of alliance and betrayal, the economic forces that drive military campaigns, the personal rivalries among lords that cost thousands of lives. But seeing the chess game doesn't make you any less of a pawn. The maps you study for military purposes become documents of your own irrelevance. Each marked location represents a place where you might be ordered to die for reasons that will be explained to you only after the battle is over, if at all. Your strategic education teaches you to think like a general, while ensuring you'll never be anything more than an expendable foot soldier. Your training in reading and writing, limited though it is, becomes a curse when you're required to document atrocities you've witnessed or participated in. The official reports you help prepare describe pacification operations and tribute collection, sanitizing the reality of burned villages and slaughtered families into bureaucratic language that distances the writers from the consequences of their actions. The calligraphy skills you've developed through years of practice are employed primarily in copying orders for violence, writing letters that demand impossible payments from impoverished communities, and maintaining records of supplies seized from people who can't afford to lose them. Your beautiful brushwork becomes complicit in systematic cruelty, each elegant character a tiny work of art in service of ugliness. Your mathematical abilities, such as they are, get used to calculate how many troops are needed to suppress a village, how much food can be extracted from a region before famine sets in, how many hostages are required to ensure compliance with unreasonable demands. Numbers become weapons, and your skill with them makes you an accessory to suffering. The philosophical texts you're required to study don't expand your understanding of ethics or meaning. Instead, they provide sophisticated justifications for the status quo, complex arguments for why inequality is natural, elaborate theories about why your suffering serves a greater good. Philosophy becomes another tool of control, using intellectual complexity to make injustice seem inevitable. Your meditation practices, supposedly designed to bring inner peace, actually function to suppress your natural human responses to the horrors you witness and perpetrate. You learn to empty your mind, not to achieve enlightenment, but to become a more efficient instrument of violence. Mindfulness becomes mindlessness. Awareness becomes numbness. The martial arts forms you practice daily are beautiful in their precision and deadly in their application. Each movement has been refined over generations to maximize lethality while maintaining aesthetic appeal. You perfect techniques that could kill a man in dozens of different ways, turning your body into a weapon while your spirit atrophies from disuse. Your weapons become extensions of yourself in ways that are both literal and metaphorical. The sword at your side isn't just a tool for combat, it's a symbol of your trapped identity, a constant reminder of your role as an instrument of someone else's will. You care for it with religious devotion because it represents the only aspect of your identity that society recognizes as valuable. The armor you maintain so meticulously becomes a second skin that protects your body while exposing your soul to constant damage. Each piece represents hours of labor, months of savings, years of debt, all to create a shell that makes you look formidable while feeling utterly vulnerable. You're encased in metal and leather that can deflect blades but offers no protection against the psychological wounds that accumulate with each campaign. Your horse, when you have one, becomes a partner in your isolation. The animal depends on you for care and feeding, but you can't provide adequately for either yourself or your mount. You share your meager rations with a creature that trusts you completely, while knowing that both of you are expendable resources in someone else's calculations. The roads you travel become familiar through repetition, but never comfortable through familiarity. Each path leads to another assignment, another battle, another opportunity to compromise whatever remains of your humanity. The landscape holds no beauty for you because every vista is evaluated for its tactical significance, every village assessed for its potential as a target or obstacle. Your conversations with fellow samurai revolve around topics that deliberately avoid acknowledging your shared misery. You discuss technique, strategy, weather, anything except the growing certainty that your lives are being wasted in service of masters who see you as interchangeable parts, in a machine designed to concentrate wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands. The silence that falls between you and your companions during long marches speaks volumes about thoughts that can't be shared. Everyone is thinking the same things, questioning the same assumptions, harbouring the same doubts, but the social conditioning runs too deep to allow honest communication. You march in collective solitude, alone together in your suffering. Your dreams, when exhaustion finally overwhelms anxiety long enough to allow sleep, are haunted not just by the faces of your victims, but by visions of the life you might have lived in different circumstances. These phantom alternatives torment you with their impossibility while providing momentary relief from the grinding reality of your actual existence. The morning ritual of preparing for another day of service becomes an act of psychological armor donning as much as physical preparation. You arrange your face into appropriate expressions, modulate your voice to proper tones, adjust your posture to reflect your station. By the time you're fully dressed and equipped, the person you might have been has been buried beneath layers of performance and protocol. Your interactions with the common people you're supposed to protect reveal the growing gap between the samurai class and the population it ostensibly serves. They see you not as a guardian, but as a threat, not as a protector, but as another form of tax collector, albeit one armed with sharp steel and legal authority to use it. The children who once looked at samurai with admiration now hide when you approach. Their parents bow appropriately, but watch you with wary eyes that calculate how much your presence will cost them. The elderly remember when samurai might have been welcome in their communities, but those days feel like ancient history even to people who lived through them. Your presence in a village creates tension even when you're not there on official business. People know that samurai don't travel alone for pleasure, that your appearance usually precedes demands for tribute, conscription, or compliance with new regulations. You've become a harbinger of misfortune, a symbol of unwelcome change imposed from above. The merchants you interact with have learned to hide their prosperity when dealing with samurai, understanding that visible wealth makes them targets for special assessments and emergency contributions to whatever campaign your lord is currently funding. They've developed elaborate strategies for appearing poor while maintaining the trade relationships that actually sustain the regional economy. The farmers whose crops feed the armies you serve resent every grain that's taken from their fields, but they've learned to express this resentment through passive resistance rather than open defiance. They hide portions of their harvest, underreport their yields, and find countless small ways to minimize their losses while maintaining the appearance of compliance. Your role in collecting these tributes makes you complicit in a system that impoverishes the very people whose labor makes civilization possible. You take food from hungry families, silver from struggling craftsmen, labor from communities that can barely sustain themselves. Each collection expedition leaves you feeling more like a bandit than a warrior, but the alternative to compliance is death. The economic reality behind the political rhetoric becomes impossible to ignore as you witness the actual mechanics of wealth transfer. The rice, silver, and goods you collect flow upward through layers of hierarchy, with each level extracting its portion until a fraction of the original tribute reaches its supposed destination. You're participating in an elaborate system of organized theft disguised as legitimate governance. Your lord's lifestyle, glimpsed during rare visits to his residence, reveals the destination of all this extracted wealth. The elaborate meals, expensive clothing, imported luxuries, and architectural grandeur exist in stark contrast to the poverty of both the peasants who produced the wealth and the samurai who collected it. You're simultaneously the enforcer and the victim of this system, powerful enough to oppress others, but powerless to improve your own circumstances. The seasonal cycle of campaigns begins to feel like a treadmill of violence that produces nothing except more violence. Spring's wars create the instability that requires summer's punitive expeditions, which generate the resentment that fuels autumn's rebellions, which necessitate winter's harsh suppression. You're trapped in an endless loop of conflict that serves no purpose except maintaining the system that created the conflicts in the first place. Your weapon skills, honed through years of practice, become tools for solving problems that wouldn't exist if the system were different. You perfect techniques for breaking down doors to collect taxes that impoverish communities, develop strategies for defeating farmers who are defending their harvests, master methods for suppressing populations that rebel against unreasonable demands. The code of bushido that supposedly guides your actions provides justification for whatever your lord commands, no matter how obviously unjust or destructive those commands might be. The code's flexibility in interpretation allows it to sanctify any action taken in service to proper authority, turning moral philosophy into a rubber stamp for immorality. Your spiritual practices become increasingly hollow as the gap widens between the ideals they supposedly represent and the realities they're used to justify. You recite prayers for peace while preparing for war, meditate on compassion while planning violence, contemplate the interconnectedness of all life while participating in its systematic destruction. The natural world around you begins to feel like the only honest thing in your environment. Trees don't pretend to be something they're not. Rivers don't flow uphill to please their superiors. Mountains don't bow to anyone's authority. Nature's indifference to human hierarchies becomes almost comforting compared to the constant performance required by social interaction. Your aging body begins to rebel against the demands placed upon it, but showing physical weakness could be interpreted as spiritual weakness, which could cost you your position and doom your family to even worse poverty. You learn to hide pain, ignore injuries, and push through exhaustion that should be rest, turning your body into another tool that you're destroying through overuse. The younger samurai you occasionally encounter seem both more naive and more cynical than your generation, having grown up entirely within a system that has become more rigid and demanding over time. They've never known anything except the current arrangements, which makes them simultaneously easier to control and more likely to crack under pressure when the contradictions become too obvious to ignore. Your interactions with these younger men force you to confront how thoroughly you've been shaped by your circumstances. Their questions about honour, duty and meaning echo ones you stopped asking years ago, not because you found satisfactory answers, but because continuing to ask them was too painful to bear. The letters you write to your son, who will soon be old enough to begin his own training, become exercises in communicating warnings without explicitly undermining the system he'll be forced to navigate. You try to prepare him for realities you can't directly acknowledge, hoping he'll understand the subtext while maintaining the surface loyalty that survival requires. Your wife's letters in return reveal her growing understanding of what your life actually entails, though she never states this knowledge directly. Her words carry undertones of grief for the husband she married and the father her children deserved, but whom the system has gradually erased and replaced with a functionary who happens to share your name and face. The family visits that punctuate your service become increasingly strained as the gap widens between who you are at home and who you must be in service. Your children relate to you more as a distant authority figure than as a parent, having learned that emotional distance is safer than attachment to someone who might be ordered away at any moment. Your house, when you have time to notice it, tells the story of your family's gradual decline through accumulated small failures to maintain, repair, and improve. Each season brings new problems that can't be addressed, new compromises that become permanent, new accommodations to circumstances that grow steadily worse. The garden that once gave you pleasure becomes another source of guilt, as you realise that the time and resources required to maintain it properly could be better used meeting your family's basic needs. Beauty becomes a luxury you can't afford. Even the simple beauty of flowers you could grow yourself. Your few personal possessions acquire disproportionate significance because they represent the only aspects of your identity that aren't entirely defined by your role. A brush for calligraphy that belonged to your grandfather, a small scroll of poetry you copied as a young man, a stone from the mountain where you were born. These objects become anchors to a self that the system constantly tries to erase. The rituals that punctuate your daily life lose their meaning through repetition and become mere habits that you perform automatically. The prayers become sounds without significance. The ceremonies become movements without purpose. The traditions become empty shells that contain nothing except the momentum of their own continuation. Your education in history reveals the cyclical nature of the political arrangements you serve, showing you that the current system is neither eternal nor inevitable. Previous arrangements have risen and fallen. Different forms of government have succeeded and failed. Other ways of organising society have been tried and abandoned. This knowledge makes your current circumstances feel even more arbitrary and meaningless. The philosophical texts you study describe ideals of governance, justice, and social harmony that bear no resemblance to the realities you experience daily. These theories exist in a realm of pure abstraction that has no connection to the practical business of extracting wealth from unwilling populations through the threat of violence. Your training in strategy teaches you to think systematically about resource allocation, troop deployment, and tactical advantage, but these skills only make you more aware of how poorly the overall system functions. You can see the inefficiencies, contradictions, and self-defeating aspects of the arrangements you're required to enforce, but pointing them out would be interpreted as disloyalty. The maps you study show borders that shift constantly as lords gain and lose territory through marriage, war, inheritance, and political manoeuvring. These boundary changes affect the lives of thousands of people who have no say in their governance, but the human cost of political instability never appears in the strategic calculations you're taught to make. Your weapons maintenance becomes a meditation on the tools of your trade, but it's a dark meditation that focuses on instruments designed solely for ending life. Each piece of equipment represents refinements in the technology of violence, improvements in the efficiency of killing, advances in the art of destroying human beings. The armour you wear bears the marks of battles you've survived, but each dent and scratch represents a moment when someone tried to kill you for reasons that had nothing to do with you personally. You've become a target for the accumulated resentment created by the system you serve, hated not for who you are, but for what you represent. Your horse learns to respond to your moods and commands, but the animal's trust and loyalty only emphasize your inability to provide adequate care. The creature depends on you completely, while you depend on a system that sees both of you as expendable resources to be used until they're no longer functional. The roads you travel connect places that exist primarily to serve the needs of people you'll never meet, whose decisions shape your life, while remaining completely indifferent to your welfare. Each journey takes you further from any place you could call home, while bringing you no closer to any destination you would choose for yourself. Your conversations with fellow samurai develop their own coded language for discussing forbidden topics, but even these carefully indirect communications carry risks that make genuine connection dangerous. You learn to share your isolation without acknowledging it, to express your doubts without stating them, to seek comfort without admitting your need for it. The silence that surrounds your service becomes oppressive in its completeness. No one speaks honestly about the contradictions, injustices, and futility that define daily life. The conspiracy of silence protects the system by preventing the formation of any collective consciousness that might challenge its assumptions. Your dreams become the only space where you can safely experience emotions that your waking life prohibits. In sleep, you might feel anger at your circumstances, grief for your lost possibilities, or simple human longing for connection and meaning. But these feelings must be buried again each morning when duty calls. The dawn light that signals another day of service becomes less a promise of renewal than a reminder of continuity. Another cycle in an endless repetition that will continue until death provides the only available form of release. The sun rises on a world that has no place for your authentic self, only for the role you've been trained to perform. And so you rise, don your armour, take up your weapons, and prepare to spend another day serving a system that consumes your life while demanding your gratitude. The cherry blossoms may fall beautifully, but their beauty exists in a world you can observe, but never truly inhabit. You remain forever outside the natural cycles of growth, renewal, and genuine peace, trapped in a human-made hell disguised as honour. The morning mist that rises from the valley below your mountain post carries with it the smoke from countless cooking fires, each representing a family beginning their day with hopes and concerns that revolve around their own welfare, rather than the ambitions of distant masters. That simple domesticity, so close you can literally see its evidence, remains as unreachable as the moon. Your breakfast, when you can manage to obtain it, consists of rice so meagre that counting the individual grains becomes an unconscious habit. Sometimes there's a thin soup made from whatever vegetables haven't rotted in storage, occasionally supplemented with fish so small and bony that eating them requires more energy than they provide. This isn't the elegant cuisine associated with Japanese culture in popular imagination. This is survival food, stretched to its absolute limits and still insufficient to maintain proper health. The tea ceremony, when you're required to participate, becomes a cruel pantomime of refinement performed with implements, you can't afford to replace, and ingredients you can barely afford to use. You go through the precise motions learned in childhood, each gesture calculated to demonstrate proper breeding and spiritual discipline, while your stomach cramps with hunger and your mind races with anxiety about debts that compound daily. Your sleeping arrangements reflect the gap between your supposed status and actual circumstances. The futon you lie on is thin enough that every irregularity in the floor beneath becomes a source of discomfort. The blankets that cover you are insufficient for the mountain cold that seeps through walls built more for appearance than insulation. You sleep poorly, waking frequently to check that your weapons haven't been stolen, that your meagre possessions remain secure, that no emergency summons has arrived requiring immediate response. The latrine facilities you share with other low-ranking samurai are a constant reminder of your place in the hierarchy. While your lord enjoys private chambers with servants to maintain cleanliness and dignity, you wait in line for access to communal facilities that are cleaned sporadically and maintained poorly. Even your most basic bodily functions become exercises in humiliation disguised as character building. Your bathing, when it occurs, happens in water that's been used by others before you and will be used by others after you. The luxury of clean, warm water for personal use is reserved for ranks far above your own. You learn to be grateful for any opportunity to wash the accumulated grime and blood from your body, regardless of the conditions under which that washing occurs. The clothes you wear beneath your armour tell their own story of gradual decline. Each garment has been mended repeatedly, patched with fabric that doesn't quite match, reinforced with thread that contrasts with the original material. Your undergarments are more patched than original cloth, but replacing them would require resources that must be allocated to maintaining your public appearance instead. Your tools for personal grooming are basic and shared among multiple people. The razor you use is dull from overuse and lack of proper maintenance. The mirror you look into is cracked and clouded, providing only a distorted reflection of features that grow more haggard with each passing season. Personal hygiene becomes another area where your actual needs conflict with the resources available to meet them. The ink and paper required for your correspondence cost more than you can comfortably afford, but maintaining communication with family and fulfilling official reporting requirements isn't optional. You learn to write smaller, to use every available space on each sheet, to dilute ink until it's barely visible, but still technically functional. Even your handwriting becomes an exercise in making limited resources stretch as far as possible. Your formal education, such as it was, prepared you for a world that doesn't exist. The classical texts you memorized describe idealized relationships between lords and retainers based on mutual respect and genuine care. The reality involves lords who see retainers as interchangeable and retainers who must pretend gratitude while being knighted. The systematically explo gap between theory and practice becomes a source of constant cognitive dissonance. The poetry you're expected to compose and appreciate follows rigid forms that leave no room for expressing authentic emotion or experience. Your verses about seasonal beauty and philosophical acceptance must mask the ugly realities of your daily life. Even your artistic expression becomes another form of performance designed to demonstrate proper thinking rather than genuine feeling. Your knowledge of music extends only to instruments and songs that serve ceremonial functions or provide appropriate background for official gatherings. You're not encouraged to develop personal taste or find music that brings you joy. Instead, you learn to produce sounds that fulfill social obligations while suppressing any creative impulses that might lead to unauthorized self-expression. The games you occasionally play with other samurai serve primarily as training exercises, disguised as recreation. Go teaches strategic thinking, but the strategies you learn are applied to conflicts that benefit others while putting you at risk. Even your leisure time becomes preparation for better service, leaving no space for genuine relaxation or enjoyment. Your religious observances blend Buddhist acceptance of suffering with Shinto reverence for hierarchy in ways that consistently justify your circumstances while providing no genuine comfort. You're taught to see your misery as evidence of spiritual progress, your powerlessness as proof of proper humility, your exploitation as demonstration of worthy service. Faith becomes another tool for maintaining compliance rather than a source of genuine meaning or peace. The festivals you participate in celebrate values and achievements that exclude you by definition. Harvest festivals honor abundance you'll never experience. New Year ceremonies mark fresh beginnings that aren't available to people trapped in hereditary roles. Spring celebrations welcome renewal that can't touch lives governed entirely by unchanging obligations. Your medical care, when you can access it at all, focuses on keeping you functional rather than truly healthy. Battle wounds receive attention because they might affect your combat effectiveness, but chronic conditions that merely cause pain or discomfort are ignored. Your body becomes a machine that must be maintained well enough to serve its purpose but doesn't deserve care for its own sake. The herbs and remedies available to you are the cheapest and least effective options. Anything that might actually improve your quality of life costs more than your budget allows. You learn to endure pain, ignore illness, and work through conditions that would disable someone with access to proper treatment. Physical suffering becomes so routine that you stop noticing it consciously, though it continues to wear down spirit. Your teeth, your body, and, without access to proper cleaning tools or techniques, gradually deteriorate until eating becomes a source of constant discomfort. The pain affects your sleep, your concentration, and your already limited ability to find pleasure in food. But dental care is a luxury far beyond your means, so you simply adapt to increasing levels of oral agony. Your eyesight, strained by years of scanning horizons for threats and reading by inadequate light, begins to fail in ways that affect your combat effectiveness. But admitting visual problems could cost you your position, so you learn to compensate through experience and instinct, while hoping that no one notices your increasing reliance on sound and movement rather than clear sight. Your hearing, damaged by years of proximity to weapons clashing and orders being shouted, develops gaps and distortions that make communication more difficult. But showing any sign of sensory impairment could be interpreted as weakness, so you become expert at pretending to hear things you've missed and understanding commands you've only partially caught. The chronic injuries accumulated over years of service create a symphony of aches and limitations that affect every movement. Your shoulder throbs from an old spear wound. Your knee clicks from a fall during a night raid. Your back spasms from sleeping on hard ground for months at a time. But you learn to move normally despite the pain, to fight effectively despite the limitations, to appear strong despite the accumulated damage. Your mental state, worn down by constant stress and repeated trauma, develops its own collection of symptoms that you must hide from others. Sleep comes irregularly and brings no rest. Concentration wavers at crucial moments. Memory becomes unreliable for anything except the skills needed for survival. But showing psychological weakness would be even more dangerous than admitting physical problems. The nightmares that plague your sleep feature not just the people you've killed, but the people you failed to save, the orders you've followed against your better judgment, the compromises you've made to preserve your family's survival. Your subconscious mind replays scenarios where you chose duty over humanity, loyalty over justice, survival over integrity. These dreams offer no resolution, no redemption, just endless repetition of choices you can't unmake. Your waking hours are haunted by sudden moments of dissociation where the unreality of your circumstances becomes temporarily overwhelming. You might be standing guard at a gate, mechanically scanning for threats, when the absurdity of your situation hits you like a physical blow. You're protecting people who despise you, serving a system that destroys you, maintaining order that benefits everyone except yourself. The relationships you form with fellow samurai are built on shared suffering rather than genuine compatibility or mutual interest. You bond over common hardships, trade techniques for managing impossible circumstances, and provide each other with the minimal emotional support that survival allows. But these connections remain superficial because deeper intimacy would require acknowledging truths that are too dangerous to speak aloud. Your interactions with your superiors become increasingly mechanical as you learn exactly what responses are expected and provide them regardless of your actual thoughts or feelings. You develop different versions of yourself for different audiences, each carefully calibrated to produce the desired reaction, while revealing nothing authentic about your inner experience. The reports you write about your activities must present events in ways that reflect well on your superiors, while taking responsibility for any failures or complications. You become skilled at crafting narratives that satisfy official requirements, while bearing little resemblance to what actually occurred. Truth becomes another luxury you can't afford. Your correspondence with other samurai stationed in different locations reveals that your experiences are universal rather than exceptional. The letters you exchange, carefully coded to avoid explicit criticism of the system, paint a picture of widespread misery disguised as honor, systematic exploitation presented as privilege, and collective desperation masked by individual stoicism. The seasonal rotation of duties ensures that you never develop enough familiarity with any location to feel at home there. Each new assignment requires learning different hierarchies, different expectations, different ways to navigate local politics without triggering conflicts that could destroy your position. You become a permanent stranger, always adapting but never belonging. Your knowledge of multiple regions gives you perspective on the arbitrary nature of the conflicts you're asked to fight. Border disputes that seem crucial from one lord's perspective appear meaningless when viewed from a neighbouring territory. The enemies you're ordered to kill in one season might become allies you're expected to protect in the next, depending on shifting political arrangements that have nothing to do with justice or logic. The weapons you carry become extensions of your trapped identity, symbols of capabilities that serve others rather than yourself. Your skill with these instruments represents years of dedicated practice that could have been applied to crafts that might improve your circumstances. Instead, you've perfected arts that only have value when applied to purposes chosen by people who see you as expendable. Your armour, carefully maintained despite its age, and the patches that cover old damage, becomes a shell that protects your body while exposing your spirit to constant assault. Each piece represents compromises made to present an acceptable appearance while dealing with inadequate resources. You're encased in metal and leather that can stop arrows but offers no protection against the psychological wounds that accumulate with each campaign. Your horse, when you're fortunate enough to have one, becomes a companion in isolation. The animal responds to your moods and commands with a loyalty that contrasts sharply with the calculated relationships that define your human interactions. But even this bond is tainted by your inability to provide adequate care, turning companionship into another source of guilt and inadequacy. The roads you travel become familiar through repetition rather than choice. Each path leads to another assignment, another conflict, another opportunity to compromise whatever remains of your authentic self. The landscape holds no beauty for you because every feature must be evaluated for its tactical significance, every vista assessed for potential threats or advantages. Your maps show territories that exist primarily as abstractions in the minds of lords who have never walked their boundaries or met their inhabitants. The lines drawn on paper represent claims that must be enforced through violence, borders that must be defended through bloodshed, possessions that must be maintained through oppression. Geography becomes another weapon in conflicts you don't understand and can't escape. The seasons lose their natural meaning and become markers for different types of misery. Spring brings campaigns that separate you from family. Summer means fighting in conditions that kill through disease and exhaustion as often as enemy action. Autumn requires collecting tributes from populations already devastated by war. Winter offers no rest, only preparation for the next cycle of destruction. Your body ages prematurely, under the stress of constant vigilance and repeated violence. The mirror shows you a face marked by experiences that have left no room for joy, peace, or genuine contentment. You're growing old before your time, wearing out like a tool that's been used beyond its intended limits, breaking down in ways that can't be repaired. Your mind, conditioned from childhood to suppress natural human responses, develops its own forms of rebellion that manifest in ways you can't control. Sudden moments of rage that must be immediately suppressed. Waves of grief that threaten to overwhelm your composure at inappropriate times. Flashes of longing for a different life that must be buried before anyone notices your momentary weakness. The food you eat, when you can obtain it, serves only to maintain basic functionality rather than provide pleasure or satisfaction. Meals become fuel for a machine that must continue operating regardless of its condition. You lose the ability to taste subtleties or appreciate flavors, eating mechanically while your mind focuses on more pressing concerns about survival and duty. Your sleep, when exhaustion finally forces your body to rest, brings no refreshment or restoration. Dreams merge with waking anxieties until the boundary between rest and vigilance disappears. You learn to sleep while remaining alert to potential threats, never fully relaxing even in moments of supposed safety. The dawn light that signals another day of service becomes a reminder of continuity rather than renewal. Each sunrise marks another cycle in an endless repetition that will continue until death provides the only available form of escape. The sun rises on a world that has no place for your authentic self, only for the role you've been conditioned to perform with mechanical precision. And so you rise, don your patched armor, take up your well-maintained but ultimately meaningless weapons, and prepare to spend another day serving a system that devours your humanity while demanding your gratitude for the privilege. The morning mist that rises from valleys where free people begin their days with hope and purpose serves only to remind you of possibilities that were never available to someone born into your circumstances. The cherry blossoms may fall with perfect beauty, their brief lives celebrated in poems and paintings, but their natural cycle of growth, flowering, and peaceful death exists in a realm you can observe but never enter. You remain forever trapped in an artificial world where death serves others' purposes, and life has meaning only insofar as it advances agendas you played no part in creating. Your story is written in scars and silence, told through compromises that accumulate like sediment until the person you might have been lies buried beneath layers of duty, honour and service that benefit everyone except yourself. The samurai's path, so romanticised in legend and literature, reveals itself in lived experience as a carefully constructed trap that uses your own virtues against you, turning loyalty into chains, courage into compliance, and honour into a beautiful name for systematic self-destruction. The cherry blossoms may fall with exquisite grace, but you'll never have time to properly appreciate their beauty because you're too busy calculating how their seasonal timing affects military campaigns. Spring means war, and war means you'll soon be marching away from whatever small comforts you've managed to scrape together during the winter months. Your departure from home becomes a ritual of quiet desperation disguised as honourable duty. Your wife packs what little food she can spare, knowing it won't be enough, but unable to provide more. Your children watch with eyes that have learned not to ask when you'll return, because the honest answer is that you might not. The few possessions you can carry must serve multiple purposes. Your writing kit doubles as medical supplies. Your spare clothing becomes bedding. Your personal items transform into trade goods when desperation strikes. The roads you march along are littered with evidence of previous campaigns. Burned villages that were never rebuilt. Fields that remain fallow because there's no one left to work them. Graveyards that expand each season as fresh conflicts produce new casualties. You walk through a landscape shaped by violence, heading toward your own contribution to its ongoing transformation. Your fellow travellers on these forced journeys are men caught in identical traps, each maintaining the pretense that this life represents some form of achievement. The conversations during rest stops avoid any mention of the growing futility you all recognise. Instead, you discuss technique, weather, and the supposed honour of previous battles. The silence between these superficial exchanges speaks volumes about thoughts that can't be safely shared. The villages you pass through treat your arrival with barely concealed dread. Children disappear into houses that suddenly seem empty. Market stalls close without explanation. The few people who remain visible bow appropriately, while calculating how much your presence will cost them. You've become harbingers of expense and disruption, symbols of a system that extracts resources while providing nothing of value in return. Your camping arrangements reflect the harsh economics of military service. The officers sleep in tents that provide actual shelter, while you and your fellow foot soldiers make do with whatever protection you can improvise from your equipment and the landscape. Sleeping on the ground becomes normal, waking up soaked by rain becomes routine, and the chronic exhaustion that results from never getting proper rest becomes your constant companion. The food provided during these campaigns barely qualifies as nourishment. Rice stretched with whatever can be foraged, supplemented by anything that can be taken from the territories you pass through. Hunger becomes so routine that you stop noticing it consciously, though it continues to affect your strength, concentration, and ability to recover from the physical demands of constant movement. Your weapons and armour, which must be maintained regardless of conditions, become additional burdens that drain your energy and resources. Rust is a constant enemy in wet weather, requiring oil that costs more than you can afford. Damage from use or accidents must be repaired with materials that aren't available, and skills that must be bartered for with possessions you can't spare. The actual fighting, when it finally comes, bears no resemblance to the noble combat celebrated in stories and songs. Most of your targets are farmers with improvised weapons, desperately trying to protect harvests they need to survive. The battles are usually massacres with trained warriors cutting down people who never had a chance to learn proper defense. There's no honor in it, no test of skill, just systematic slaughter disguised as military necessity. Your training in swordsmanship, which took years to develop, gets used primarily for intimidation rather than actual combat. The sight of a sharp blade in trained hands is usually enough to secure compliance from people who understand that resistance means death. You become an expert in the psychology of threat, learning to communicate violence without always having to deliver it. The aftermath of these encounters leaves you covered in blood that isn't your own, surrounded by bodies of people whose only crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. The official reports will describe these events as successful pacification operations, but you know you've just participated in organised murder for the benefit of people who will never see the consequences of their decisions. Your return journey carries the weight of what you've done, but there's no time for reflection or processing. The loot you've collected must be catalogued and distributed according to rigid hierarchies that ensure most of it flows upward to people who didn't participate in its acquisition. Your share, when it finally reaches you, is barely enough to cover the equipment damage and personal expenses accumulated during the campaign. The debriefing sessions that follow focus on tactical lessons and strategic implications, while completely ignoring the psychological cost of what you've experienced. No one asks how you feel about killing unarmed civilians or burning homes that reminded you of your own. The assumption is that a proper samurai doesn't have feelings about such things, that spiritual discipline has eliminated your capacity for normal human responses to trauma and violence. Your family's reaction to your return reveals how these experiences have changed you in ways you don't fully recognize. Your children seem afraid of the stranger who shares their father's face but speaks in clipped military tones. Your wife notices the new scars, the way you startled at unexpected sounds, the manner in which you eat, as if someone might take your food away. She asks no questions because she understands that the answers would be unbearable. The few weeks you spend at home between campaigns become exercises in pretending to be the person you used to be, while knowing that each deployment takes you further away from any authentic version of yourself. You go through the motions of domestic life while remaining mentally prepared for the next summons that will tear you away from these fragile moments of peace. Your house shows new signs of decay each time you return, problems that have worsened in your absence and will worsen further before you have another opportunity to address them. The roof leaks more extensively, the walls show fresh cracks, the floor has developed new soft spots that suggest structural problems you can't afford to repair. Your family has adapted to these deteriorating conditions while maintaining the fiction that everything is acceptable. The debts you discover upon each return have grown through compound interest and emergency expenses that your family couldn't avoid in your absence. Medical costs for illnesses that struck while you were away, repairs that couldn't be delayed without risking total collapse, food purchases that were necessary to prevent starvation. Each campaign that was supposed to improve your circumstances actually makes them worse. Your weapons and armour, which must be maintained between deployments, consume resources that your family needs for basic survival. The oil for preventing rust costs the same as several days' worth of food. The materials for repairing damage could pay for clothing that your children have outgrown. The time you spend on maintenance is time that could be used to address household problems that multiply in your absence. The social obligations that come with your position require expenditures that push your family deeper into poverty. Formal ceremonies demand appropriate clothing that costs more than months of income. Gift-giving traditions expect generosity that must be borrowed against future earnings. Hospitality requirements force you to serve food and drink that leaves your own family hungry but maintains the appearance of prosperity. Your children's education, such as it is, prepares them for lives identical to your own. Your son learns to handle weapons that will serve masters he's never met. Your daughter learns domestic skills that will help her manage poverty with dignity when she marries another impoverished samurai. Neither child is encouraged to imagine alternatives to the roles that have been predetermined for them by birth and social expectation. The seasonal festivals that mark the passage of time become reminders of isolation rather than opportunities for genuine celebration. While merchant families feast together and farming communities share their harvests, samurai families perform appropriate rituals while struggling to afford the materials that proper observance requires. Your celebrations are hollow performances of traditions that have lost their meaning through economic desperation. Your religious practices provide no genuine comfort because the spiritual teachings you've absorbed focus entirely on acceptance of suffering rather than hope for improvement. Buddhism emphasizes the illusory nature of individual desires, while Shintoism stresses duty to ancestors who demand sacrifices you can't afford. Faith becomes another burden rather than a source of strength. The poetry you write during quiet moments must conform to established patterns that leave no room for expressing authentic experience. Your verses about seasonal beauty and philosophical acceptance mask the ugly realities of poverty, violence, and systematic exploitation. Even your artistic expression becomes another form of performance designed to demonstrate proper thinking rather than process genuine emotion. Your correspondence with relatives in other regions reveals that your experiences are universal rather than exceptional. Every samurai family faces identical struggles with poverty, violence, and social pressure. The letters you exchange, carefully worded to avoid explicit criticism of the system, paint a picture of widespread suffering disguised as honor throughout the entire warrior class. The maps you study between campaigns show territories that exist primarily as abstractions in the minds of lords who treat human communities like game pieces. The borders drawn on paper represent claims that must be enforced through violence, possessions that must be maintained through oppression, resources that must be extracted through systematic cruelty. Geography becomes another weapon in conflicts that serve no purpose except maintaining artificial hierarchies. Your aging process accelerates under the constant stress of violence, poverty, and social pressure. Each campaign leaves you with new injuries that don't heal properly, new scars that tell stories of encounters with desperate people defending their homes. Your body accumulates damage faster than it can repair itself, wearing out like equipment that's been used beyond its intended limits. Your mental state deteriorates through exposure to repeated trauma that you're not allowed to acknowledge or process. Sleep brings nightmares featuring the faces of people you've killed. Waking hours are haunted by sudden flashes of memory that trigger physical responses you must immediately suppress. You develop a relationship with violence that's simultaneously intimate and horrifying, becoming expert in techniques for ending human life while losing your capacity for normal human connection. The few genuine relationships you manage to maintain are poisoned by the knowledge that duty might require you to sacrifice them at any moment. Love becomes a liability when your obligations could demand actions that destroy everything you care about. You learn to hold people at emotional distance as protection against the pain of inevitable loss. Your children grow up seeing this emotional unavailability and learning to replicate it in their own relationships. They absorb lessons about the dangers of caring too deeply, the necessity of putting duty before feeling, the wisdom of expecting disappointment rather than hoping for happiness. The cycle of dysfunction disguised as virtue perpetuates itself through generations of families who learn to mistake suffering for strength. The merchants who hold your debts develop their own forms of subtle contempt for the samurai class. They're systematically impoverishing. They understand that your social superiority is fictional, that your military training is irrelevant to economic realities, that your honor is incompatible with the practical business of survival. They bow appropriately while calculating how much profit they'll extract from your desperation. Your lord's decisions continue to shape your life completely, while you have no input into those decisions and no understanding of the reasoning behind them. Political arrangements change overnight, turning allies into enemies and enemies into allies based on considerations that are never explained to the people who must implement them through violence. You become a tool for enforcing policies you don't understand in service of goals that provide no benefit to your family or community. The weapons you've spent years learning to master become symbols of your trapped identity rather than sources of personal power. Your skill with blade and bow serves purposes chosen entirely by others, making you efficient at tasks that benefit everyone except yourself. The more expertly you can kill, the more killing you'll be asked to do, turning mastery into a guarantee of increased suffering. Your armor, carefully maintained despite its patches and repairs, becomes a shell that protects your body while exposing your spirit to constant assault. Each piece represents compromises made to present an acceptable appearance while dealing with resources that are never adequate. You're encased in metal and leather that can deflect physical attacks but offers no protection against the psychological wounds that accumulate with each campaign. Your horse, when you're assigned one, becomes a companion in isolation whose needs compete with your family's survival. The animal requires food, shelter, and care that drain resources while providing companionship that's tainted by your inability to meet its basic needs. Even this relationship becomes another source of guilt and inadequacy. The seasonal rotation of assignments ensures that you never develop enough familiarity with any location to feel secure or comfortable there. Each new posting requires learning different hierarchies, different expectations, different ways to navigate local politics without triggering conflicts that could destroy your position. You become a permanent outsider, always adapting but never belonging anywhere. The dawn light that signals another day of service becomes less a promise of possibility than a reminder of continuity in an existence that offers no genuine choices. Each sunrise illuminates a world where your authentic self has no place, where your individual needs and desires are irrelevant to the role you must perform. The day ahead holds nothing except more of the same obligations, compromises, and small betrayals of your humanity that have defined every previous day. And so the cycle continues, grinding down generations of families in service to a system that transforms their virtues into chains, their skills into weapons against themselves, their honour into a beautiful mask for systematic destruction. The cherry blossoms fall as they always have, marking time in a natural world that remains forever beyond your reach, while you prepare for another season of serving masters who see you as nothing more than an expensive, disposable tool in their endless games of wealth and power. So there you have it. The next time someone tells you how romantic and noble the samurai were, how they lived lives of honour and dignity, how they embodied some perfect warrior ideal, you can quietly smile and know the truth. The reality was starvation disguised as discipline, exploitation wrapped in ceremony, and systematic destruction of human dignity painted as spiritual achievement. The samurai weren't warriors. They were victims of one of history's most sophisticated psychological control systems, conditioned from birth to take pride in their own annihilation. These men lived and died believing their suffering had meaning, that their sacrifice served some greater purpose, that their compliance with injustice somehow made them honourable. But the only thing their lives really accomplished was enriching masters who saw them as disposable tools and perpetuating a system designed to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of people who never risked anything themselves. The cherry blossoms still fall in Japan today, but now they fall on a world where people can choose their own paths, pursue their own dreams, and build lives based on their own values rather than predetermined roles. The samurai's greatest victory wasn't any battle they fought or any enemy they defeated. It was their eventual disappearance from history, making room for a world where honour doesn't require poverty, where loyalty doesn't demand self-destruction, and where courage can be used to build rather than destroy. Sweet dreams, everyone.